Okay, today we're going to talk about the Toyota Direct Shift-8AT front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive transaxle. It's been around for a little bit. They've had it in multiple vehicles, Camrys, Avalons, RAV4s, various Lexus products. I'm interested in it more now because my GR Corolla has one. It's a really cool transmission. It's made quite a bit different than a regular automatic 8-speed from some of the competitors. And the biggest reason is you only have two planets. You've got one up front that's a double pinion simple planet, one Ravino in the rear, and when you put those two together, that's called a Lepeltier gear set. So that's been used before in other vehicles for a long time. So that combination isn't necessarily new. What is new is the ability to get 8 speeds and a reverse out of it instead of the 6 speeds and a reverse that's a lot of other manufacturers have been able to get out of it. So there are 6 clutches in this one. There's 4 driving clutches and 2 brake clutches. There's no sprag or a mechanical one-way diode or whatever you want to call it used. Um, the 4 driving clutches, they call them the C1, the C2, the C3, the C4. Then you have 2 brakes, the B1 and the B2. So what I've got here is I've got the apply chart. I've got a ratio, and this is for the version that's in my GR Corolla called the UC80F. And then a skeleton view of like if you were to cut the Geartrain in half, labeled with all the clutches and their locations. On park, you don't have any clutches applied. In reverse, you have the C3 and the B2 brake applied. Now, there's 2 neutral modes for this transmission. It can put itself fully in neutral, or they call it N1, which is under a certain miles per hour. When you're coasting down, it's usually when you have a paddle or you're trying to get like a manual low for that engine braking. It'll turn on the B2 brake. First gear, you have the C1 and the B2 applied. Second gear, you have C1 and B1. C1's used in first through fifth. C2 is used in fifth through eighth. C3 is reverse, third, seventh. C4 is fourth and sixth. B1 is for second and eighth. And then B2 again is for reverse, that odd neutral condition that can't exist, and first gear. The torque converter in all of them is a multi-plate lockup. Toyota uses a strategy called flex lockup, which lets it slip a little bit. That's not uncommon. A lot of manufacturers do that. You'll see it anywhere from a couple hundred RPM down to 50 or so, and then you have what they consider full lock, which, and from what I've observed in my car, has been about 0 to 5 to 10 RPM. There is in that clutch stack in the converter, you'll have either 3, 4, or 6 discs depending on what engine you have it behind. If you're in the 6-cylinder, you have 4 discs. If you have a UB80, which is used in a lot of the 4-cylinders, non-turbos, you'll have, from what I've seen, 3 or 4, depending on the vehicle. If you have the UA81, which is used behind the 2.4 turbo engines, like the Grand Highlander, things like that, you have 6 discs. And the same with the UC80F, which is in the GR Corolla and the GR Yaris, you have 6 discs. So I'm going to show UA80F out of a 2020 Highlander that had a failure, lost the thrust washer, and so it burned a whole bunch of clutches, and just kind of go through, tear it down, go through it, show you all the parts inside it, kind of how they work together. Now, because of how this unit is put together, I can't do like a normal power flow like I did on the Mazda video. So I'm going to have a graphic for each gear after the teardown and walkthrough that shows how each gear is made, including the algebra and then what clutch sets are applied, and try to hopefully explain it well enough that way that you can kind of get an idea of how it actually makes the gears. All right, so here's the gear train all by itself. We'll pull this out of the way so we can see something here. So the gear train is made of 2 planets. You've got 8 speeds, 2 planets, 6 friction clutches. There's no one-way clutch in these units. There's 2 brakes and 4 driving clutches. C4, C3, C1 down in there, B2, B1, and then C2 lives inside here. Front planet is considered a simple planetary. Bottom planet is a Ravenel set. Traditionally, this has been called the Lepeltier system, and you generally get 6 speeds out of it. A Ravenel gear set is basically a 4-speed transmission, and you can get reverse. So you've got 4 forwards and a reverse. You have 2 underdrives, a direct, and then an overdrive. Now, what's cool about this, this is traditionally like how a, in theory, like a 6L80 or something works like that, was a Lepeltier. But what Aisin and Toyota have done is they've found a way to overdrive, or not overdrive, but drive the 2 sun gears at different rates down here at the bottom. And that gives you 8 speeds. So it's a pretty cool setup. We'll go through the actual power flow a little bit later about how they actually, how they function and what the ratios are. But it's a really cool design. This is the front support. Pump's right there. There's a gear and a chain here that drives the pump. Sun gear from the front planet. Spline's on there so it can't turn. So here's the front planet, which is also the input shaft. You've got a separate torque converter charge, so what delivers the fluid to the converter, and then you've got a TCC apply circuit that's different. That's why they can control lockup so nicely on these and do the flex lock. Sun gear down here is free floating right now, but spline's on that so it can't move. You've got inner and outer pinions on that, and that is one piece, so every time the input shaft turns, the planet carrier turns with it. This is the ring gear that it slides into. So that's kind of a pain to put together one-handed, but now we're together there. You gotta be careful to set it down, sun gear falls out. But that'll rotate around in there. Your ring gear becomes an output depending on which clutches are grabbing here. So I can show how the front planet works if you set it up in the pump support like that, because the sun gear down in there is held stationary. So the C4 clutch hub is here, C3 clutch hub is here, input shaft is here. So you can see if we can get a good angle here. The input shaft is turning the C4 drum at input shaft speed, and the C3 drum is turning about half that. It depends on the unit, on that actual ratio of what it's turning at. This is the C2 clutch hub. It's on the very bottom. This is what splines into that guy there. So anytime the input shaft rotates, that hub also rotates. Clutches that sit inside there grab the bottom of the Ravenel and turn that. And that's on in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th gear. This is the Ravenel gear set. Failure on this one is this thrush washer came apart. There's some pieces in it that were stuck in the clutch hub that goes on the bottom of that. Got 2 sun gears. You can see your different pinions inside there. Sun gears slide apart because they're grabbed by different clutches and hubs. So the rear sun gear drives the lower pinions. And that sun gear drives those. So the counter gear. This is the output of the transmission. So this is the output of the transmission, is this gear right here. That slides down, the ring gear's on the inside of here, driven by that output. This guy drives this. That's your pinion to your diff. This is the B1 clutch hub. I'm going to leave it off while I put the gear train back together because it covers up quite a lot. But the B1 clutches go inside here. And when you hear about this one, so like in the Highlander, you hear about the bearing noise that they have. These are those bearings they talk about. Sit down here. This is the counter gear. Those are the races on the inside there. And there's a race that sits there. So this one actually doesn't look too bad. The last one we did. Let's see if we can find the damage here. So that race is chewed up really bad right there. Probably going to be a little hard to catch the damage on the bearings themselves on the video, but both of those were destroyed. That one was making the classic high-pitched whine that everybody talks about. This one just had clutch failure, like 3 or 4 of them. But when they talk about that noise that you have to replace the transmission for, those are the bearings they're talking about. And it rotates at output shaft speed of the transmission, so as your vehicle speed increases, the noise increases. This is the B1 clutch hub. That splines down to that sun gear. B1 clutch sits on the outside, so they have the ability to brake that from turning. This is the C1 clutch hub. Clutches are on the inside of that. See if we can get that to mesh. Okay, you can see those move interdependent of each other, not splined into each other. C1 clutch is a driving clutch, B1's a brake. So that stops something from moving, this causes something to move. Here's the clutch hub that goes in here. C1 clutch is right on the bottom. And that just kind of free spins in there, there's bearing. But the C1 clutches, and this is what makes it difficult for me to do the powertrain video, because I have to somehow hook those up and make C2 drive. I haven't figured out a way to do that, so we're going to do all the power flow drawings later. But, so C1's on the bottom, and then C3 clutches. Spline there. Next is the input shaft with the planet. It has the spline to the C2 drum and the pinions. There we go. This is the C3, C4 clutch drum. C4s are in the middle, C3s are external. These are riveted together. If you have a problem with one of these, you have to buy a new one or get a good used one from Toyota, and Toyota wants an insane amount of money. They're usually a couple $1,000s for them. But it goes on here. And we'll see if we can get this to line up. It also, so it's not only is it pulling power from the C3s and C4s, it slides onto this, the B1 hub, like that. So here's the first of the power flow charts I put together. So you got the skeleton diagrams, again, cut in half. The one on the left is going to show in red the parts that are stopped in the unit. In blue are the parts that are driving, and green is the output. On the right side is the actual power flow through the unit, and up top are the algebraic formulas to express how the gear ratios are made. So the gear ratios in the UC80F are tighter than any other version of this transmission, and Toyota wanted a close ratio gearbox for the Yaris and the Corolla. So all of these numbers are based on that. There's different ratios if you have a UA81, UA80, and a UB80. So in first gear, the C1 clutch connects the front planetary ring gear and the sun gear, and the B2 brake prevents the rear planetary carrier from turning either clockwise or counterclockwise. So that's how it forces the power through there. You're turning, when the front planet is using the ring gear as an output, in this transmission, it turns at a 1.933 ratio. and that feeds the Ravino set. So the Ravino has its own reduction because in first, second, and third on this transmission, you're using what would be the first 3 speeds of the Ravino as well. So you're having an extra reduction going through it. So second gear, you've got the C1 again connecting, and the B1 turns on, the B2 releases. Now that prevents the middle sun gear from turning either clockwise or counterclockwise. So that changes power flow, so it still does the 1.933 reduction in the front planet, but that changes how it moves through the Ravino to what would be the second gear of the Ravino. But you still have that reduction, so you get an overall ratio of 2.809 in second gear. So third gear is pretty cool. It's actually using the 1-to-1 ratio of the Ravino done through the 1.933 reduction of the front planet. So the front planet is actually making third gear because C1 is turning the ring gear for the front planetary ring gear and the rear sun gear. C3 turns on. That connects the front planetary ring gear and the middle sun gear. So you're grabbing 2 clutches that are turning at the same speed, being fed into 2 of the inputs on the Ravino, and that locks the Ravino. So the Ravino turns at a 1-to-1 ratio, whereas the front's still spinning at the 1.933 reduction, so third gear of 1.933. So you can see fourth gear is kind of wild. You can look at the size of the algebraic equation and see that there's something interesting going on. So you've still got C1 connecting the planetary ring gear and the rear sun gear, but then C4 turns on, which hooks the front planetary carrier and the middle sun gear. So what we're doing now, you get a ratio of a 1.497, but it's just because we're driving both sun gears in the Ravino at different speeds, because the C4 is, if you remember from earlier, the C4 carrier can only turn at input shaft speed. So you're turning the middle sun gear at a 1-to-1 ratio with engine speed, but you still have a reduction going into the Ravino from the front planetary ring gear, which is turning at 1.933. So that's a really interesting concept because you're actually using the planets almost like it's slipping in essence to get that ratio. Really cool. Another transmission does that is the ZF9 speed in the front wheel drive stuff there. Similar concept. You're driving 2 different things to get a ratio that you haven't ever been able to get before because you're using the planet in essence to slip against itself. Fifth gear is a similar, except the C1 stays on, C4 turns off, the C2 turns on. So then you're driving the rear planet carrier of the Ravino at input shaft speed while still turning in reduction speed from the C1 turning at 1.933. So the algebra is a little less intense on this one, but you have a similar thing where you're using 2 rotational input speeds to get you an output ratio that's a little different. And that's 1.266 in this transmission. Sixth is really simple. You've got the C2 stays on. So you're turning the carrier of the Ravino at input shaft speed. C4 turns back on, and that turns the front at input shaft speed. So you're just coupling the unit together so it's turning at input shaft speed. So that's direct drive. So seventh is a little funky. You've got C2 on, but then it turns C3 on. So you've got a reduction going into the front of the Ravino against input shaft speed again. But where it goes through the Ravino, it speeds up. So you have an overdrive ratio in seventh of 0.793. Eighth is another one that's really easy to see how it works. C2 stays on, so you've got input shaft speed coming there. B1 turns back on. What that does is that prevents, again, your middle sun gear from turning. So what we're actually using now is the Ravino's overdrive ratio that it has. So in 1, 2, and 3, we're using the actual direct Ravino ratios to some extent. And then in fourth, or in eighth, we're using what would be the Ravino's overdrive to actually be eighth gear. So for reverse, C3 turns on, and then B2 turns on. So B2 is stopping the rear carrier from turning. C3 is doing an input of a 1.933. The way the gears are cut, when you do that and you stop the rear planet carrier from turning while you have C3 engaged, that causes the output to actually spin backwards. So that's how you get reverse gear, and it's a pretty good ratio of 3.59. So that concludes this video pretty much. I'm going to be putting together a video that directly compares the UC80F to the other variations of this family to kind of show what Toyota did to increase torque capacity, and the really cool changes that they made to this unit to give you like a high performance shifting automatic that the GR Yaris and the Corolla use. That one will probably be a few weeks out. I'm waiting on a few things to show up and put stuff together for the holidays.